Chapter 31, Set Fire. Chapter 31, Set Fire. It feels like my specialty has become setting fire to tents, Ingrid thought, briefly explaining the plan while holding a piece of wood. No one in the squad added anything and just listened. At this point, it was like they were already caught in the arrow once it was fired. Then Ingrid moved. "I'll go first." He stepped quietly, without making a sound. Eventually, he lowered his posture, lying flat and crawling on the ground. The entire squad watched as Ingrid crawled. His plan was simple. A basic trick, yell from the east and strike from the west. The group shouting was Mac and the rest of the squad. Only 3 were absent from the shouting side. Ingrid, Andrew, and the soldier with a history as a thug. "I'll do it." Mac stepped up first, taking on the role of attracting the soldiers' attention. There were no complaints, and he spoke up without hesitation. Ingrid thought little of Mac's sudden change in attitude. It was fine as long as he followed orders. Mac slowly loosened up in the dark, picked up a rock, and threw it. The rock hit the thug's helmet. Thud! The rock bounced off the helmet, and the soldier screamed in pain. "Damn it! What's that?" The 4 soldiers on guard turned their bodies toward the sound. Ingrid held his breath and watched them. There was no need for words. "Intruder!" the soldier shouted. Chaos ensued. At that moment, Ingrid tried to move closer to the tent. "You little rat!" He was caught. There was no need to panic. He had learned from today's events. "Can't do this alone." A soldier holding a spear next to the tent glared at him. Before the soldier could charge, Ingrid rose to his feet. The dirt on his chest fell to the ground. Without even a battle cry, the soldier with the spear lunged. Ingrid watched the spear fly and twisted his body to avoid it. No, it wasn't just about avoiding. He gambled with half his life. The heart of the beast gave him the courage to do something reckless. He dodged and moved forward. The spear grazed his shoulder. He barely avoided it. He felt a burning heat from his shoulder. Instead, Ingrid had closed the distance to his opponent. The moment he gained distance, he slashed upward with his sword. The enemy soldier, seeing the sword, lowered his spear to block with his shield. At the same time, Ingrid thrust his hidden left-hand knife toward the soldier's collarbone. Crack! The blade pierced both bone and flesh. "Ooh!" The enemy soldier groaned. Ingrid slammed his forehead into the soldier's nose. Thud! The soldier fell backward without even letting out another sound. It was the Valent-style mercenary swordplay, the 3-sword method. The first sword was a trick, the real attack was the knife in the left hand and the headbutt. He had gambled half his life to rush toward the spear like this. He had taken down the enemy soldier. But, since he had already been discovered, starting a fire in the barracks was no longer feasible. Another soldier appeared behind the fallen one, holding a torch and a sword. The man with scars around his eyes looked formidable. Just his stride and attitude told Ingrid everything. He wasn't a rookie. Pathetic. He clicked his tongue before speaking. There was a sense of ease in his step. He had just witnessed an ambush in the dark, but there was not the slightest hint of fear in his demeanor. That took a while. Ingrid muttered. The man furrowed his brow at his words. Flames were rising behind him. The tent had caught fire. "Put it out!" the man shouted. Seeing this, Ingrid rushed forward and thrust his sword. He pushed off the ground with his right foot and planted his left foot firmly. Everything begins with the feet. This was the basic swordsmanship shared by Rem and Ragnar. Ingrid did just that. With his feet. He kicked the ground and moved forward. In an instant, he saw the soldier holding both a sword and a torch, and the gap in his stance was clear. Ingrid thrust his sword. A thrust that carried all his body's power, the same thrust that had killed so many soldiers before. Thud! The sword cut through the air and reached its target. It was a moment, an instant. Out of all the thrusts he had performed, this one was the best. Even considering all the repetitions from today. Ingrid thought he had killed the enemy. As he focused, everything seemed to slow down. The world around him, the soldier's hand, and even his own sword, all moved slower. In this slowed world, the enemy soldier's hand twitched. Soon, the soldier's sword rose from below, aiming upward. Clang! Thud! Incrid swerved past the man, his body bouncing sideways as he stopped, clutching his side. The enemy soldier, who had been facing away, turned back to face him. He looked at Incrid and raised his eyebrows. Arrogant bastard. The enemy seemed to be boiling with rage. Of course, the anger was no problem for Incrid. The real issue was the incredible sword skill. At that moment, the thrust had been perfect. It had been flawlessly satisfying. It was the kind of thrust that even REM wouldn't have dared to stop unless he had an axe that bent like a whip. Yet, the enemy had avoided it. There was a faint cut on his neck, but it was far from a fatal wound. It could be considered a mere scratch. Meanwhile, the enemy's reflexive counterattack had sliced Incrid's side. It wasn't a deep wound. The bone wasn't damaged. He wouldn't die from it. Let my guard down for a moment. But this was the result. After all, how familiar had Incrid become with today? Still, it felt as though a great river lay between him and the enemy. The enemy could cross it and strike or kill him at any time, but Incrid felt like all he needed to do was dip his feet in the river, and that would be the end of it. There was a clear gap in skill between them. So what? When had he ever fought only against weaker opponents? Incrid steadied his breath and gripped his sword. If this was the turning point of today, all he could do was give his best. The skill gap felt overwhelming. But it didn't change anything. While others would see the gap as despair or a precipice, Incrid saw it as a staircase. A staircase that, one day, he would climb. A thrilling euphoria filled him, starting from his toes and spreading to his chest. Look! How is repeating today a curse? By overcoming countless days like today, he would eventually defeat that overwhelming powerhouse. It will happen, without a doubt. He would never settle for today. That's why the euphoria surged. Incrid's heart, filled with this feeling, was evident on his face. You're smiling? The face of the enemy soldier holding a sword twisted in anger. While Incrid's face displayed euphoria, this one showed nothing but rage. I'll tear you apart and feed you to the dogs. Incrid sensed death. He couldn't win against the opponent right now. But he had no intention of submitting quietly. He braced for pain, refusing to retreat. As he gripped his sword, his resolve strengthened. Whoosh! A flame erupted behind the man. The earlier fire seemed like a joke compared to now, as though a dragon itself had spit fire. The flames quickly spread across the entire tent. Sparks flew in all directions, sizzling and crackling. From beyond the flames, frantic voices rang out. These bastards! Put out the fire! Someone poured oil. Platoon leader! The torch fell over. Oh, they were efficient. Incrid had deliberately drawn attention to the tent to ignite it. Once by Mac and the squad members. Another time, with his own actions. The fire had been set by Andrew and the Thug-Turn squad member. The Thug-Turn squad member showcased his skill, learned from causing trouble in the city. The flagpole's burning! A man shouted as he watched the flames rise beside the tent. He had a strange tattoo on his face. Platoon leader! Don't you know what's important right now? He scolded the man standing in front of Incrid. Seeing this, Incrid took a small step back. Even though his skill was inferior to the opponent's, he wouldn't die easily from one or two sword strikes. The enemy knew this too. If he held on, he could outlast the flames as they consumed the tent and the flagpole inside it. Honestly, Incrid didn't understand why someone would risk their life over a flagpole. The only thing he knew for sure was that the opponent valued it. More than the lives of a few enemy soldiers, much more. You'll regret this. The enemy, a platoon leader from the Aspen unit, glared at Incrid before suddenly turning around. Rather than facing Incrid, he judged it more urgent to handle those setting the fire in the rear. Incrid exhaled a quiet sigh of relief inside. It felt like he had just come back from the dead. The feeling of dying, no matter how many times he repeated today, never got easier. If this was a curse, then it was truly a curse. Having to face that horrific moment over and over again. But the pain and death he faced weren't the real problems for Incrid. If this could push him forward, if it could make him stronger, why couldn't he endure it? We need to go. As Incrid stood on alert, Andrew's voice came from behind. Looking over, Andrew's face was covered in soot. We retreat. Incrid spoke and moved. The Thug-Turn soldier followed him. As they ran, Andrew pulled out a flute and blew into it. Scree, scree. After blowing twice, Mac arrived with the remaining squad members. Henry was bleeding, and no other soldiers followed Mac. The original 10-man squad had been reduced by half. And now, Ingrid's escape route had opened. They're getting busy. The enemy doesn't have a large pursuit force, right? Mac seemed to ask, perhaps to confirm his suspicions. He too had a gash on his forehead, blood trickling down. Probably not. Ingrid answered, moving his feet. Blood continued to flow from his side. It wasn't a deep wound, but without any bandages, the blood refused to stop. For now, he pressed it down with his hand and kept running. From this point on, it was a new day, so Ingrid stayed alert to their rear. The enemy was in pursuit. 5 of them were chasing them. You crazy bastards! The pursuers seemed relatively unscathed. Though soot marked their faces, none of them were injured. These 5 were more than enough for Ingrid, Andrew, and Mac. Henry had a hole in his abdomen, staggering from the blood loss. The thug soldier helped him, but couldn't fight properly. Damn it, we're all gonna die at this rate. Get a grip. The thug soldier yelled at Henry but didn't abandon him. Ingrid, while fighting off the pursuers, felt his side wound tear further. It wasn't life-threatening, though. Mac had injured 2 of the pursuers, but his thigh was cut in the process. Still, he quickly wrapped a bandage around his thigh and stayed with the group. Andrew seemed to have rapidly improved in combat. No, Ingrid realized it wasn't that Andrew had suddenly become stronger. It was more accurate to say his original skills were now showing, honed through intense battle experience. If Andrew hadn't fiercely swung his sword, killing 2 of the pursuers in a single strike, their escape might have failed. Or it could have become even more perilous. Blood was seeping from the wound on Andrew's cheek again. Everyone was battered, but none of them were dead. As they continued fleeing through the night, Henry whispered weakly, almost dead. If we head west from here, we'll reach the fox and snake habitats. They won't catch us there. The Green Pearl Plains were home to many animals. Among them were foxes and snakes. The foxes weren't the problem, but there were many venomous snakes, making it dangerous. We'll end up getting killed by venomous snakes before we shake off the enemy. Mac grumbled. Then Henry, with a faint smile, spoke up. There's an area where the fox and snake habitats overlap. I know it. It's a boundary zone, so it's safe. It's a hunter's path. Ingrid couldn't help but think how strange it was that Henry was smiling so faintly under such dire circumstances. Guiding them through the forest in this condition? His mental strength was extraordinary. Everyone looked at Ingrid. It was his decision to make. We'll follow your lead. Ingrid spoke and moved. There was no hesitation. As he walked, his thoughts drifted. The first time I saw him. The enemy platoon leader's face lingered in his mind. Had the platoon leader shown up every time, Ingrid would have been too busy fighting for his life. But this was the first time. Perhaps he had only appeared because Ingrid had pushed him to this point. Or not. Upon further thought, Ingrid realized he had heard that voice before. After repeating today a few times, when they had taken refuge in the tent the enemy had set fire to. As he barely entered the tent guarded by the enemy, Ingrid witnessed a strange sight. The flagpole, the flag. Strange smoke rising, a man with tattoos on his face. He had even kicked the flagpole in frustration. At that moment, Ingrid realized the flagpole must have held great significance to the enemy. Then, from behind, someone had struck Ingrid's neck. Who the hell are you? Upon reflection, Ingrid realized the voice belonged to the same man. Lost in thought, Ingrid followed Henry's lead, and soon the surroundings began to turn blue. The light from above surrounded them, heralding the start of a new day. It was dawn. The sky began to brighten. Ingrid realized he had passed yet another today. As the sun rose and the surroundings grew bright, Ingrid's scout unit met with the main reconnaissance team. What happened to you guys? As soon as they met, the scout leader asked. Ingrid had more pressing matters to address than explaining. There were many injured. The report could wait until they were on their way back. For now, surviving was enough. Phew, I'm passing out. Henry murmured from behind. Ingrid said nothing in reply. There was no point in speaking to someone who had already lost consciousness. Chapter 32, 32, Dreams, Reprimands, Responsibilities. Chapter 32, Dreams, Reprimands, Responsibilities. How's the flag? It's fine. The captain of the Aspen Duchy didn't like the operation currently underway. But what could a mere commander do when orders came from above? If they said do it, then he had to do it. And so, he was doing it, though a small problem had arisen in the process. A few rats from Norilia had infiltrated the barracks and set fires. Even though more than half of his troops were stationed in the tall grass, the invasion had been allowed. No matter how much he disliked it, the operation had already begun. At this point, his pride was on the line. Failure was something he couldn't afford. You should have been more thorough with the defenses. The owner of the flag spoke. His words made the captain's forehead vein throb. It was annoying to hear someone who would drop dead in an instant if he pulled his sword and struck at his throat. But what could he do? There had indeed been a hole in his unit's defenses. True. Flap! The captain said that, then stormed out of the barracks, swiping the door with his hand. He couldn't understand this situation. Does this even make sense? Was it possible for the enemy to notice this place? Fine, let's say they could. But what about next? Did they really sneak past his troops lying in the tall grass, fewer than 10 in number, and attack the main flag? The captain trusted his unit. Of course, he did. His nickname was the Demon Captain because of how harshly he trained his men. He believed that if you didn't cough up blood during training, you'd cough up blood and die on the battlefield. And this was the unit he had built. Can they really break through this? While soldiers could lose a battle, there were no soldiers who failed at keeping watch. The captain truly believed that. But would he reprimand his own troops? He couldn't just do that. Whoever planned and executed this had to be extraordinary. The courage to infiltrate enemy lines with so few soldiers. The skill to fight and survive against his own platoon leader. And the perfect execution of setting fires and retreating. Even though the squad leader had to let them go due to the fire spreading behind. Luck is also skill. The captain, who had spent a long time on the battlefield, knew the importance of luck. He spoke to his waiting adjutant. Except for the squad leader on duty, bring all the commanders here. Yes, sir. His unit was part of the regiment but had its own command authority. It was an independent unit. And in most cases, independent units had nicknames. This unit's name was Greyhounds. In the Aspen Duchy, the Greyhound was a dog with grey fur, known for its persistent personality. The Greyhound, once it marked a target, had to stick with it, whether it was for love or a fight. Because of this, the Greyhound unit was also called the Persistent Lovers. Now, the leader of this unit had marked an unnamed enemy scout leader. I will definitely hunt them down. The Greyhounds had locked onto its target. The captain repeated his resolve in his heart. He would catch and kill them. Above his head, in the tent, clouds began to form, likely due to the sorcery of the shaman present. It looked like it was going to rain. Recently, the rains had mostly been the work of the shaman inside the tent. And this shaman was the key to this strategy. Though he still didn't like it, there was no denying it was an efficient operation. If this plan were nonsense, the commander of the independent unit, the Greyhound, or the Persistent Lovers, would never have participated in it. A battlefield where victory was guaranteed. Despite the thirst for vengeance, it did feel somewhat uninteresting. You're telling me that after accidentally discovering the enemy's ambush, you just happened to stumble upon the enemy's main camp and while you were at it, set their camp on fire? It did sound strange when put that way. Ingrid didn't nod but added a few words. Yes, I thought it was the right decision at the time, and it happened to turn out that way. The scout squad leader blinked in confusion. What was he even saying? The guy was about his age but had somehow managed to become a squad leader. His skills were poor, and he swung his sword at every opportunity. He was an idiot. That was the general outside opinion of the troublemaker squad leader. But now, hearing what he had done, well. It was shocking even to Ingrid himself. The surviving squad members had more to say, and it was even more ridiculous. Rumors aren't trustworthy. If possible, I'd like to learn more from you. Back then, Andrew had seemed arrogant, and the scout leader had worried about sending him off. Now, after the guy had forcibly taken command of the scouting unit, saying it was only natural. He even said he wanted to learn more. Was this the same Andrew he knew? As far as skills go, I think he's above average for a mid-level soldier. Next came Mac, Andrew's mentor. The scout leader knew Mac's abilities. It was partly because he trusted Mac's skills that he had given Andrew the command of the scout unit. And now, Mac was giving him credit. For skill. He knows a lot. I just told him what to do, and this is what happened. Lastly, came Henry, a plains hunter. The squad members all agreed. They followed him, believing in him. They wouldn't all lie about it. So this really happened. Ingrid had taken over the scouting unit, snuck past enemy soldiers lying in wait in the tall grass with fewer than 10 men and set the enemy's camp on fire before returning alive. Does this even make sense? It didn't, but they had set the fire and gathered intel, so what could he say? Sorting through everything he had heard left him flustered. He was told he stood still among the enemy and managed to avoid detection. He moved through the enemy camp in the dark without anyone spotting him. Well, I guess he was just really lucky. In the end, the scout leader could only say that. Ingrid thought that was a fair assessment. Thanks to repeating today, he couldn't say he had memorized the enemy's movements and camp positions. Yes, luck was on my side. If it was luck, it was certainly no ordinary luck. The goddess of fortune had not just kissed him but had slept with him. But there was really no other explanation, either. Since it wasn't something to hide, rumors began to spread through the scout unit. The troublemaker squad leader Ingrid was a lucky man, the man the goddess of fortune had entrusted her coin to, pure luck itself. Or, they said, he had used up all his luck in this scouting mission. There was nothing else to report on the return trip. During their half-day walk, the only thing that happened was a light drizzle. The rain fell from a clear sky. It was rare, but it wasn't an unheard-of sight. Throughout the return journey, Ingrid was absorbed in one thought. Was that the best option? It was a question he asked himself. If he could repeat today a few more times, would it have led to a different result? Regret always lingers in every situation. Ingrid had learned that since he was young. What matters is the choice, and the process of making that choice. I thought it was the best. Since he could repeat today, other thoughts naturally arose. The doubt of whether that was the best decision, and the lingering thought that there might have been other options. Only 4. The number of people who returned alive. Including himself, that made 5. Half of the unit had died. The result posed a question to Ingrid. Was this the best outcome? Could it have been avoided? 5 died. Those 5 were neither his family nor his friends. They were just comrades with whom he had shared a short period. Their presence or absence made no real difference. They were merely his responsibility for that moment, for that today. The long-held dream that had guided him, the conviction that had kept him steadfast until now, reprimanded him. Was that the best he could do? Could he not have saved more? What kind of knight do you want to become? Ingrid, as a young boy, was captivated by the title of knight. The boy, enchanted by the songs of minstrels about knights of old, had grown into an adult. Over time, Ingrid realized he was a man of modest talent. He had rolled through the battlefield and recognized his own limits. Yet, he never gave up on his dream. Even if that dream had torn and frayed like old leather. Even if it had been shredded to pieces by the reality of life. He never gave up. Therefore, he could not end up merely captivated by the word knight. A knight is a protector, a knight is one who takes action, a knight is one who shows his will. What kind of knight will I be? Through repeating today, Ingrid was able to step beyond his limits. In that case, he should protect something he had seen and heard, something he had learned and established through his own eyes and ears. What kind of knight did I want to be? The dream torn apart by reality, the word conviction reprimanded him. Ingrid accepted that reprimand. By doing so, he decided to move past what had already passed. Even if repeating today could have saved 5 more lives, it was no longer something he could change. That today was over. To dwell on it was foolish. Main unit ahead. One of the soldiers walking with him spoke. Phew, we made it. Henry, who had been supported from behind, muttered. So, when we return, will you rush straight to the flower shop widow? I can't go until this battle is over, right? Ingrid replied, and Henry answered with a bright smile. The joy of having survived, of returning after breaking through such dangers, filled his heart. The same was true for everyone else. Especially for the former thug soldier. He spent the whole journey thinking over and over again about what had happened during the mission. How had he managed to survive? He had always thought he would die living as a thug, but somehow he ended up joining the army. And somehow, he ended up serving Andrew as his lord. And then this reconnaissance mission. He had learned much. As the former gangster soldier hobbled over with his injured leg, he approached Ingrid. It wasn't intentional, but he hadn't spoken a word the entire journey. If you don't repay your debts, you're no better than an animal. That was what an older brother had told him when he took him in as a child. That brother had long since died, but his words had become a guiding principle in his life. Even though he had lived roughly, the gangster knew how to repay a favor. I apologize for my bad manners. I will repay the favor of saving my life if I get the chance. Ingrid, who had been staring at the soldier who approached him suddenly, nodded. Had he really saved his life? If anything had gone wrong, it could have easily been Ingrid's last moment. The soldier's survival was more luck than anything. In fact, during today's repeated cycle, that soldier had died many times. It was just that, on this day, in this moment, Lady Luck had momentarily smiled upon him. Do as you wish. Ingrid answered nonchalantly, then turned around to see Andrew and Mac. Thanks. Mac spoke first, his expression more friendly than usual. Andrew's gratitude was even more noticeable. I hope we can meet again someday. Ingrid had once thought he was an arrogant brat, but now his attitude had changed. His gaze had turned respectful. Ingrid, feeling the pain in his side, pressed his palm gently against it and said, If we're on the same battlefield, we'll meet again. The flower of the battlefield. Infantry. The infantry slogan became their farewell greeting. The reconnaissance squad leader, who had been watching from the side, came over. You're all clear to return. Injured ones, report to the medical tent. Everyone did well. And, well, no. Forget it. The reconnaissance squad leader had intended to discuss achievements and rewards but stopped himself. I'll report it first. It wasn't something that could be easily believed. It was too early to discuss it when even the higher-ups might doubt it. Then, as the pain in his side subsided, Ingrid decided he didn't need treatment and immediately moved forward. It was time to return. I hope nothing's wrong. Though he had no time to think about it in the tall grass, as he neared the camp, he wondered if his squadmates had been behaving. Had they gotten into a fight with someone else? Or maybe they had been fighting among themselves. There was bound to be some trouble. That's why they were called the troublemakers of the unit. Just before they reached the camp, the sound of a loud clang rang out. The trained hearing he had gained through Jackson kicked in. He pinpointed the source of the noise immediately. It was coming from the main camp. Ingrid quickened his pace. As he approached the camp, he saw a crowd gathered. In the center, two figures were locked in combat, axe and sword clashing. The location was in front of the troublemaker's tent. The one wielding the axe was REM. The one holding the sword was Ragnar. Chapter 33, The Objective. Chapter 33, The Objective. The emerald green eyes of the company commander gleamed with curiosity as she listened to the squad leader's report. With just 10 men. The events involving other squads during the reconnaissance mission were relatively uneventful. The only notable incident was an encounter with an Aspen infantry reconnaissance team on the plains. Instead of engaging in combat, the two sides simply kept their distance and parted ways. It wasn't unusual to run into Aspen reconnaissance units on the plains. After all, it was expected that they'd be operating as well. If anything, it was stranger that they'd only crossed paths once. However, what Ingrid's unit had accomplished was on an entirely different scale. The enemy had set up an ambush in the tall grass. They were up to something. Discovering such intel was understandable. But to infiltrate the enemy lines with just 10 soldiers and set their camp ablaze. What kind of lunatic is he? At the center of all this was Ingrid. Even during the previous assassination incident, the same name had surfaced. Wherever things seemed to go awry, there he was, the squad leader named Ingrid. Should this be dismissed as mere bad luck? But for someone supposedly cursed by misfortune, he was remarkably resilient. Not only that, he often achieved unexpected results, if not outright success. Wasn't it because of that squad leader's endurance during the assassination attempt that the target could be protected? And this time? The feat of infiltrating enemy lines and gathering information alone warranted more than 100 commendations. Yes, that seems to be the case, the squad leader replied. 10 men had infiltrated enemy lines, and while 5 had perished, the remaining 5 returned with unbelievable achievements. This wasn't some elite unit trained by the Cyprus Division but a reconnaissance team led by a mere lowest-ranking soldier. The company commander couldn't help but feel intrigued. Encrid. What kind of lunatic was he really? His skills were average at best, so how was this possible? She decided there was no need to overthink it. Luck. It could only be attributed to luck. If not, what else could explain it? Unless he had memorized the enemy's positions as if he'd walked into their commander's mind, which was absurd. That hypothesis was even more implausible. The idea that Encrid could be a spy trained by the Aspen Principality was a more plausible theory, but it was just as ridiculous. What kind of idiot would train a spy to be a mere squad leader with mediocre skills? Should I summon the squad leader to confirm the facts? If he's stupid enough to lie about something like this, he'd already be dead. The company commander leaned on her fist, lost in thought. The squad leader named Encrid might just be lucky. But what were the Aspen forces aiming for? For now, she needed to inform the battalion commander. That was the proper course of action. With her decision made, she stood. Where are you going? Who had chosen this idiot to lead a squad? She shoved the fool aside and said, to the battalion commander's tent. After all, reporting this incident took priority. REM was bored. There were no skirmishes, no tasks to occupy him. Both armies were locked in a standoff, glaring at each other from their respective positions. Rumors began to circulate within the unit that this might be how the war would end. Well, that's likely. Winter's coming, and these plains battles rarely conclude quickly. They'll probably pick it up again next year, said Creus, his sharp ears picking up bits of gossip and piecing them together. REM, however, didn't care about Creus's chatter or the rumors themselves. The idea of this battlefield repeating itself year after year, or that Aspen and Norilia had once been allies. It didn't matter. This is so damn boring. He spent his time sharpening his axe and juggling it for entertainment, but the monotony remained. REM was going out of his mind with boredom. Everyone else seemed to have something to do. Are you crazy? That price for cigars? Did an arrow pierce your brain or something? Big Eyes was busy hawking goods. With income likely to dwindle after the battles, he claimed he had to make the most of it now. What a hard-working soul. What? You arrowhead-like bastard. Occasionally, some fool would glare at Big Eyes, mocking his small stature. REM had taken up the hobby of intimidating such fools. A single gesture, licking the edge of his freshly sharpened axe, was usually enough to end it. Not that the axe was overly sharp. If it were honed to the point of slicing at the slightest touch, the edge would chip easily. Without magic or a craftsman's touch, this was the best maintenance method. So, licking it wouldn't actually cut his tongue. Come to think of it, my helmet did take an arrow in the last battle. The fool backed down quickly. Look, cigars are hard to come by. How many boxes did you need again? Creus raised his voice, fully embodying the role of a shrewd merchant. Meanwhile, the sneaky stray cat like Jackson wandered outside instead of sticking to the tent. The religious zealot? He was busy praying with an unsettling fervor, often banging his head on the floor with a grim expression. And always muttering, "Oh, Father, grant me answers." The guy reeked of a mad zealot. Watching him was enough to put anyone off. Lastly, there was Ragnar, who spent his time either staring blankly or sleeping. Wasn't he bored? How could he spend all day zoning out or napping? With the captain absent, this is just too boring. REM grumbled internally. He even wondered if the squad leader might have died. Reconnaissance missions were dangerous. Although the captain had improved a lot, by REM standards, his skills were still embarrassing. If he had died? It would be a shame. A big one. Have I gotten attached? From what REM had observed, the man was too valuable to let die. But following him around to protect him? That'd be ridiculous. Who was he, anyway? No one special. Just a random person he'd taken a liking to. A random person I like. Now that he thought about it, people like that were rare in REM's life. If possible, he'd like him to return alive. Not that he was anxious about it. The squad leader wasn't someone who'd fall to weaklings. Lost in these idle thoughts, REM could no longer sit still in his boredom. Whether the squad leader was dead or alive, he needed to fix the monotony of the moment. "Do you feel like dying?" REM decided on a simple solution. He kicked Ragnar, who was lying down idly, and spoke. Ragnar stared up at him with a look that seemed to say, "What the hell is wrong with you? Do you have a death wish?" Ragnar sounded serious. "I'm bored. Let me crack your skull." No more words were needed. Jackson briefly glanced at them as he passed by but ignored it. The zealot continued his bizarre prayers. Kreyes was elsewhere. The two of them agreed and headed outside. Clang! A light clash of axe and sword signaled the start of their duel. With that, they began to swing their weapons at each other. Whoosh! REM's arm swung powerfully, his axe descending with terrifying force. Ragnar dodged the blade, twisting his body as he thrust his sword forward. The thrust, far sharper than the countless attacks he'd shown before, aimed straight for REM's abdomen. REM pushed himself backward with a powerful leap, landing with a thud that left a clear footprint where he had stood moments ago. If anyone with a discerning eye had witnessed this exchange, they would have been astonished by the level of skill on display. Ingrid arrived just as the two combatants reached the climax of their battle. "Kill him!" An excited soldier shouted, his voice carrying over the growing crowd that had gathered to watch. The squad was known as troublemakers, and for good reason. They were a collection of individuals with all sorts of issues. But why did the unit keep such a troublesome group? The answer was simple: their undeniable skill. With two of them now displaying their talents, it was no surprise this had become a spectacle. Clang! Sword and axe collided, sending up a cloud of dust around them. Whoosh! Despite the swirling debris, neither took their eyes off the other. Scrape! The axe blade, which seemed to fall from above, suddenly dragged along the ground, scattering bits of stone as it went. Ragnar avoided the sweeping axe with a downward slash of his sword. Swish! The sword's trajectory was so fast it was invisible, yet in the blink of an eye, the blade was at REM's neck. Clang! Again, the axe and sword met, sparks flying as they clashed. Unbelievable, muttered the second platoon leader of the 4th Company, clearly impressed. Even a casual observer could tell their skill was leagues above his. Other soldiers who prided themselves on their abilities also found themselves humbled. Among them were a few who had aspired to advance ranks, now realizing the gap in their skills. Some, however, misjudged what they saw. I could handle that. I would have ended it already. Such thought stemmed from the mistaken belief that this display was the entirety of their abilities. Ingrid, meanwhile, stood frozen in place, his eyes wide as he watched. The chatter around him faded into silence. His focus was entirely consumed by their movements, their weapons, and the flow of the battle. He was so engrossed that sweat dripped down his nose, his entire body drenched just from observing. Sometimes, watching alone can foster growth. Unintentionally, Ingrid realized something in this moment. This approach won't work anymore. Every person has a form that suits them, whether in swordsmanship or physical training. Ingrid had something others lacked, the curse of repeating days. The endless walls described by the ferryman without eyes. Thus, ordinary methods of training or discipline were insufficient. He needed something new, tailored to his circumstances. As he observed the axe and sword wielded by the two before him, the method began to take shape in his mind. Excitement and revelation came swiftly, only to cool just as quickly, like water poured over a boiling pot. Watching the sparring match, not quite a duel, Ingrid had to admit the truth. He had never drawn out such skill from either of them. Neither REM nor Ragnar had ever shown this level of intensity during their training with him. It wasn't just their power or speed, it was their expressions. REM was smiling, his face radiating pure enjoyment. Ragnar, too, looked animated, a rare sight. How many days had he repeated? How many times had he skirted death? And yet, in this moment, he could not hope to face either of them seriously. That was his current standing. But he didn't despair. If he were one to give up so easily, he wouldn't have started down this path in the first place. Instead, he found it thrilling. He now had a clear goal. That expression. As he continued watching, he resolved to one day see them make those faces while fighting him. The determination felt deeply satisfying. A new path had appeared before him, and he had the time to walk it. The joy he felt was beyond words. Ring! The axe and sword scraped against each other, producing an eerie sound as both fighters pulled back. Sweat poured down their faces. Beads of it rolled down Ragnar's brow. REM exhaled heavily, then grinned. For someone who sleeps all day, you're not bad. Ragnar scoffed at the remark. And where do you get off evaluating me, you brute who bullies weaker opponents? Despite their sharp words, they both lowered their weapons. They understood each other's state without needing to speak. Any further would turn into a fight to the death. Although both had been fired up, this wasn't the moment for that. They had spared some strength for this sparring session. Even while fighting, they had noticed a familiar face among the spectators, Ingrid. A sign of their control and awareness. Enjoying the show? If you're going to stick around, why not spar with me? REM suddenly quipped, causing the crowd to quickly disperse. Left standing amidst the scattering onlookers was none other than Ingrid, looking disheveled. You're back? REM greeted him warmly, while Ragnar acknowledged him with a glance. The fight was over. And Ingrid had returned safely. Soon, the red-haired Jackson emerged, groggily running a hand through his messy hair, and Kraus rushed toward the squad leader. You've returned. Squad leader. Our Lord has blessed us. Even the religious squad member acknowledged him. There were 6 of them in total, the full extent of what should have been a 10-man squad. Rejoining his group, Ingrid announced his return. Chapter 34, Why Go That Far? Chapter 34, Why Go That Far? Is the reconnaissance I know different from what the squad leader knows? REM twirled the axe in his hand as he spoke. What are you talking about? You look like you've been halfway to dying and then came back. A scratch on the side, that's all. If that's just a scratch, does getting a cut mean you die instantly? REM laughed heartily after saying that. This guy hasn't changed a bit. Not that he could have, anyway. It's only been a few days for him, even though it's felt like months for Ingrid. Sure, I almost died. Ingrid touched the wound on his side as he spoke. Though, in truth, he had faced death countless times. But that wasn't something he could openly admit. Let me see. Jackson approached and peeked at Ingrid's wound. Ingrid shifted, raising his shirt for a better view. And what will you know by looking? REM grumbled, but Jackson ignored him and inspected the wound. It's nothing serious, Ingrid said. The bones aren't affected, but if you underestimate it, it'll cause trouble, Jackson replied. He wasn't wrong. I've already applied ointment. Good to hear. Jackson nodded in approval. Was there a skirmish during the recon? Big Eyes glanced at Ingrid's ragged appearance and asked. His hair was greasy, his eyes hollow from lack of rest, and his body bore the marks of continued marching after battle. Given the mission, there hadn't been much opportunity to wash, eat, or drink properly. Looking disheveled was inevitable. A skirmish? More like I tore through the enemy's camp, Ingrid thought. But there was no need to say everything. He simply nodded as if to confirm. Having arrived only to watch REM and Ragnar's sparring match, his body was now drenched in sweat and felt utterly exhausted. Got any food? Or water? It was time to eat and rest. Truthfully, he wanted to wield his sword right away, but his current state left him limited. Besides, after seeing the enemy gathered in the tall grass, it didn't seem like the battle would end here. He'd likely return to the battlefield soon, so he needed to prepare his body. Wash up first. Then we'll serve you a royal feast. REM grinned as he spoke. Ingrid nodded and headed toward a nearby stream. The infantry camp wasn't placed here by chance. The stream at the back made it convenient to secure drinking water and clean up. As he dipped his hands into the water, a sharp chill crept up. It's getting colder. The season for dropping temperatures had arrived. Ingrid splashed water on his face, stripped down, and scrubbed away the blood, oil, sweat, and grime on his body. That guy. As he washed, memories of the recent mission filled his mind. The tall grass, the ambush, slipping past the flagpole, and finally, the man with the sword and torch. I feel like we'll meet again. It was an unavoidable premonition, a sense that he would face the man again under inescapable circumstances. Is this the wall? The blind ferryman had warned him walls would endlessly block his path. It wasn't worrying, though. When a wall appeared, you simply climbed over it. To be honest, part of him was even looking forward to it. He regretted not settling the fight with that guy. If they had fought, he'd likely have died. But even knowing that, he didn't want to avoid it. He wanted to face him. The moment he saw him, an inexplicable competitive spirit had ignited. Sometimes, there are people who make you feel this way. It's like falling in love at first sight, except instead of love, it's an urge to win against them. When he returned, his body clean and refreshed, a hearty meal awaited him, warm soup, bread, and skewers of perfectly roasted meat. It wasn't quite a royal feast, but it was a rare luxury on the battlefield. Rabbit? At Ingrid's question, Rem proudly answered, personally prepared by yours truly. No way, I'm the one who caught it, Big Eyes interjected with a glare. Right, thanks, Ingrid said before devouring the food in no time. Every time I see you, squad leader, you always eat so well. You need to eat well to fight well. You're the most unique human I've ever met. Rem crossed his arms, spouting nonsense as he watched Ingrid eat. To hear unique from someone whose hobby was assaulting allies? Ingrid couldn't believe it. You're the last person I want to hear that from. Rem burst into laughter again at his response. After that, the squad members scattered. Jackson left, saying he had errands. Big Eyes declared it was time for his business dealings. The religious squad member knelt in prayer, while Rem idly lingered outside the tent, likely pestering passing soldiers with jokes. Meanwhile, Ragnar silently watched Ingrid. He could feel his gaze. What? Annoyed by the attention, Ingrid turned to ask. Just looking. Ragnar answered casually, half reclined. When Ingrid tilted his head in confusion, Ragnar turned away, saying it was nothing. He seemed like he had something to say but wasn't ready to share. Experience told Ingrid it was pointless to press. He'd bring it up eventually if it mattered. If not, well, it wasn't worth worrying about. Having just returned from a mission, Ingrid was exempt from both sentry and meal duties. He ate well and slept soundly. Jackson's ointment worked wonders. His side wound healed quickly. With 2 days of rest, he'd be back in top shape. Even while resting, Ingrid didn't waste time. 10 out of 10, I'll probably lose. Seated, he repeatedly swung his sword in his mind. First, Rem. Then, Ragnar. Finally, the enemy from the tall grass. He pondered and pondered some more. An old swordsman in a coastal town once told him, if you don't want to die to a blind blade, you've got 2 choices. First, pray to the goddess of luck like your life depends on it. The first was to rely on luck. And the second is to think. Think endlessly. The old swordsman used to say that if you survived a fight with half your life hanging by a thread, that battle became your asset. To survive those battles, what must you do? Think. Ponder. Strategize endlessly. If you ever face an enemy without a plan, then all you can do is put everything on the first option, the goddess of luck. Think and plan if you don't want to end up like that. He was a good teacher. It had been advice perfectly suited to Ingrid at the time. Even now, that advice shone brightly. Ingrid contemplated and strategized. What must be done to win? At the very least, what should be done to avoid defeat? The desperate measures Ingrid took to find the answer were what became known as the Valen-style mercenary swordsmanship. Though some dismissed it as crude trickery, that very swordsmanship was Ingrid's core skill. Deceptions, headbutts, 3-sword techniques, dagger throws, and even drawing techniques designed to throw stones, methods that seemed absurd and anticlimactic after the fact but proved highly effective against first-timers or less skilled opponents. In his mind, Ingrid wielded his sword. He assumed a thrusting stance, then threw a stone. Pretending to draw his sword, he hurled a throwing knife instead. Rem deflected it all with his axe, while Ragnar evaded it with agile footwork. Meanwhile, an opponent holding a sword and torch ignored the flying stone, charged forward, and thrust his sword into his own heart, splitting it. Reality might not play out exactly as imagined, but at least in Ingrid's vision, this was how things unfolded. Again. He rehearsed endlessly. Ingrid spent the entire day contemplating and fell asleep the moment his head hit the ground, utterly exhausted from the grueling mission. The next morning, Creyes brought breakfast rations, watery soup, salty jerky, and crumbly bread. You're on duty. Yes. You slept soundly. I was exhausted. Creyes rolled his large eyes and asked, what happened? Tell me. Kreis, also known as Big Eyes, was the battlefield informant. Ingrid hesitated briefly before deciding there was no need for secrecy. The matter would soon be widely known anyway, and it wasn't classified. However, he limited his explanation to mentioning that the enemy was ambushing near the tall grass. Damn it. If they're ambushing, they don't intend to let us pass easily. But what's the point of ambushing there? Though Kreis knew little of strategy, he often hit the mark. There isn't one. Had the reconnaissance route not passed through the area, the ambush would have gone unnoticed. Without Ingrid's foresight, it might have ended with the annihilation of the scouts. An ambush is a tactic for countering an attack. But the army wasn't advancing toward the tall grass, so it was pointless. That's the thing, it doesn't make sense. I don't know yet. That was the correct answer, he didn't know. He assumed the higher-ups had some plan. What was certain was that the enemy was up to something, judging by their troop formations and the fierce intent to annihilate approaching forces. Normally, such troop deployment would be overkill. The conclusion was clear, the enemy was preparing for something. Damn it, I thought this would be over. Orders will probably come today or tomorrow. Not long after their idle chatter, someone shouted from outside. Move out! 4th Company, move out! It was the voice of the 4th platoon leader. Your leg's not injured, is it? The man stuck his head into Ingrid's tent. I heard you went through hell. Where'd you hear that? Rumors are spreading. They say you're the hidden child of Lady Luck. Since the whole affair was attributed to Luck, such a reaction was expected. Then who's my dad? How would I know? The platoon leader chuckled at Ingrid's joke and added, you must be tired, but the unit's moving eastward. Let's go. Ingrid rose to his feet. East meant heading toward the tall grass. Knowing about the ambush, they wouldn't enter it directly. Feels like a fight's brewing. The air's different. REM suddenly appeared beside him, speaking quietly. Think so. Don't get cocky just because you've improved. You'll get yourself killed. Was that concern or a curse? Not just the 4th Company, but the entire infantry battalion was moving. That meant most of the 600 infantrymen mobilized for this battle were on the move. With the rhythmic sound of footsteps, the infantry advanced. There was no battle that day. After moving, they set up a temporary camp, lit fires, and settled in. No commander in their right mind would order a charge into the tall grass while risking an arrow to the head. The relocation seemed more like preparation for unforeseen circumstances. By the next morning, Ingrid's side-wound barely bothered him. Orders came to handle meals within each squad. Ingrid's squad of 6 gathered around a pot to cook stew. I caught a lizard on the way, Jackson announced, adding the drained lizard meat to the stew. For once, you're doing something useful, REM said, pleased. Jackson didn't respond. REM growled, annoyed at being ignored, but Jackson simply brushed it off. Strangely, they seemed to complement each other. One talked, the other ignored, it somehow worked. Marching, eating, and resting were exhausting tasks in the military. During all this, Ingrid noticed a peculiar gaze fixed on him, Ragnar's. You'll wear out my face, he joked. Ragnar averted his gaze. It's nothing. It was clear Ragnar had something to say. The tension remained high, as though a battle could break out any moment, but another day passed without incident. Ingrid used his spare time to practice the techniques he had visualized. Some were easier than expected, others were not. As he swung his sword in a quiet corner that morning, Ragnar approached. Why go that far? It was an abrupt question, yet Ingrid understood it perfectly. In the military, people who couldn't communicate were common. Ragnar wasn't eloquent, often speaking as he pleased. It fell to the listener to make sense of his words. Ingrid scratched his forehead with a finger. Chapter 35 Genuine Joy. Chapter 35 Genuine Joy. The Troublemaker squad members were all highly unique individuals, but they shared a common trait, a general lack of interest in their surroundings. Among them, Ragnar stood out even more, being the type who neither paid attention to others' gazes nor cared much about them. A life of half-hearted eating, fighting, and living. Ragnar lived such a carefree life, often accompanied by an abundance of sleep. Given this, Ingrid had been quietly surprised when Ragnar volunteered to join the reconnaissance unit not long ago. Ragnar volunteering to scout? Has our lazy squad member changed? That wasn't the case. Ragnar was capricious, acting on whims. Even if he had been caught up in the mood at that moment, he probably would have backed out in less than half a day. Knowing this, Ingrid hadn't sent him out anyway. It wasn't for nothing that Ingrid often handled the troublesome tasks for the squad himself. Ragnar's personality was, in many ways, the complete opposite of Ingrid's. Ragnar generally lacked enthusiasm, while Ingrid was the type to dedicate himself to honing his swordsmanship down to the last second. Of course, Ragnar did occasionally wield his sword, sometimes sparring with REM, as Ingrid had observed after returning, and at other times performing well on the battlefield. Though, on such occasions, Ragnar would often mutter, "It wasn't intentional." Knowing this about Ragnar, Ingrid found it curious that he was showing interest in him now. Why the sudden change? It was a rare occurrence. Ragnar might occasionally ask questions or make demands, but he had never shown this kind of persistent observation or meticulous preparation before speaking. Ingrid lowered the hand that had been scratching his forehead. Among the squad, REM was relatively active, but even REM engaged with people only within certain boundaries. Up close, it became apparent that REM was the type who wouldn't let others cross into his inner circle. In some ways, such guardedness made REM even more challenging to deal with than a laid-back person like Ragnar. Still, REM at least spoke his mind. Ragnar, on the other hand, rarely said even the necessary things. And now, Ragnar was asking questions. That alone made it intriguing. Ingrid met Ragnar's gaze, their eyes locking in silent understanding. A quiet stillness stretched between them before Ingrid tilted his head upward. The sky was clear, without a single cloud in sight. After a stretch of frequent rain, the vibrant, cloudless sky was a refreshing sight. It made his chest feel open and free. As he gazed at the sky, Ingrid's thoughts about why Ragnar was acting this way, what reasons might lie behind his questions, and whether his guesses were correct, all vanished. He set aside his concerns. A question had been asked, so he would answer. He applied the same principle to swords and people alike, always giving his all. Since when have I even worried about such things? Even when giving his all, his goals remained distant, leaving him constantly yearning for more. Ragnar had asked why he went to such lengths. It was likely about the constant sword practice, his relentless refusal to cut corners, or his unwavering determination despite his meager skills. So Ingrid answered with a question of his own. If I were good with a sword, what do you think would have happened? Standing outside the temporary camp, with sunlight wrapping around them, Ragnar's gaze lingered on Ingrid's face. Ingrid spoke again. What could I have become if that were the case? What might have been possible? Ingrid's voice was fluid, like a well-tuned instrument. At least to Ragnar, it sounded that way. It wasn't heated with passion, nor was it tinged with despair. It was calm and steady, as if reading a storybook to a child. I wield a sword to survive. But that's not the life I want. With those words, Ingrid swung his sword, a vertical slash from top to bottom. Whoosh! The blade sliced the air, releasing its distinct metallic scent. The battlefield's aroma, mingled with steel, tickled Ragnar's nose. Ingrid continued his training, unfazed by whether Ragnar was there or not. He practiced swordsmanship, top to bottom, bottom to top, diagonal, then horizontal slashes. Imagining a phantom opponent, he mimicked binding swords, pulling them in, and delivering a backhand strike. Ragnar watched the squad leader intently without responding. Ragnar, the lowest-ranked soldier of the Norelia kingdom, knew that the squad leader's skills were above the bare minimum. But that didn't make him a top-tier swordsman or warrior either. Even if he joined the mercenary world now, he would barely rank as slightly above average. For a mercenary, being average was hardly exceptional. Having been deeply involved in the mercenary world before, Ragnar understood this well. When it came to swords, Ragnar possessed innate insight rivaling that of a frog. He assessed the squad leader's skills and saw his limits. It's already too late. The foundation was flawed from the beginning. He should have focused on the basics when first picking up a sword. Lack of talent had stripped away his opportunities. And now? As Ingrid said, his skills, honed for survival, were holding him back. Among the squad leader's abilities, only two stood out. The first was what the barbarian REM had taught him. It was rough, but effective. The second was a sudden improvement, marked by a powerful thrust. Beyond those, his skills were riddled with shortcuts born of inadequate fundamentals. These shortcuts were the issue. Ragnar, fully aware of this through his insight, chose to address a different concern instead. If you get better with a sword, then what will you do? Ingrid stopped swinging his sword. Sweat beaded on his forehead, dripping down to the ground. The droplet soaked into the dry dirt beneath his feet. Beneath the sunlight, with sword and wind surrounding him, Ingrid spoke a dream he had repeated to himself countless times. I want to be a knight who charges toward the end of the battlefield. Why? Ragnar asked again. To him, it was an obvious question. Ragnar could see the path ahead clearly, a road where the destination was visible even without experience. But could such a road be enjoyable? Even upon reaching the destination, if there was nothing to do and nothing to desire, there would be no will to walk that path. That was Ragnar. He was a wanderer, seeing the destination and path yet unwilling or unable to walk it. Do I need a reason to want that? Ingrid countered. This was his dream, his romance, his life, and his past. It was also the dream of his youth, when he had been captivated. He had repeated it countless times over the years. There was no need for a reason to want something. But that didn't mean he planned to end it as just a wish. I want to live according to what I believe is right. To draw my sword for the poor and sick, for honor, and for the people I love. What does it mean to be a knight? Is it merely a killing machine, skilled in death and combat? Knights were often described that way. Specialized weapons of war meant to kill. But if the knight Ingrid dreamed of were just that, he wouldn't have continued wielding a sword. A knight was someone who expressed their will through their sword with honor and faith. A sword imbued with chivalry, something most had forgotten. As he spoke, Ingrid thought of Krang. Why did his words carry such weight? How did they draw everyone in? Now, Ingrid felt he understood a little. It was sincerity, the genuine heart behind the words. That was the foundation. So, Ingrid spoke with all his heart. This revelation struck Ragnar deeply. Of course, he didn't show it outwardly, so Ingrid remained unaware. Ragnar asked himself a question. Why did he need a sword if he wanted to live by what he believed was right? The answer was simple: without strength, it would be hard to realize his beliefs. A lingering emptiness had always gnawed at his heart, the source of his helplessness. But now, as he conversed with Ingrid, a different kind of flame began to burn within him, replacing his sense of powerlessness. Cradling the flame that had ignited in his chest, Ragnar sank deep into thought, sitting down on a patch of grass on the plains. What does it mean to be a knight? What is a sword? As the questions cascaded, he arrived at a conclusion. I won't know unless I walk the path. He found a reason to tread the path. Ingrid, meanwhile, left him alone and resumed swinging his sword. The silence between them was filled only by the sound of the sword slicing through the air, the sky, and the wind. Though faint, the distant noise of soldiers in camp could be heard, but otherwise, the quiet was unbroken. The silence didn't last long. Do you want to learn the sword? Ragnar spoke while staring blankly at a sharp stone embedded in the ground nearby. Thwack! Ingrid froze mid-thrust, sweat scattering in the air, his gaze fixed on the tip of his sword. Without moving, he replied. Yes. His tone was calm and straightforward. For Ingrid, it was natural to seize an opportunity to learn. Ragnar was startled by his own words. Why did I say that? He quickly realized the reason. Half of it was the desire to show the right path to the reckless squad leader before him. The other half was for himself. If the squad leader is around. He unconsciously found himself moving with greater vigor. Watching Ingrid live his life was a source of stimulation for Ragnar. Ragnar needed that stimulus, something to push him along the long and monotonous road ahead. To him, the squad leader's presence was that stimulus. With Ingrid around, Ragnar would find himself awkwardly but earnestly training. Seeing Ingrid grow and improve ignited a vitality he hadn't felt before. He had sparred with the squad leader, volunteered to take on reconnaissance, and even warmed up alongside REM. These were rare occurrences for him, at least, they had been. Now he wondered, what would happen if he taught the squad leader? It was an action motivated more by self-interest than altruism. Ingrid, for his part, didn't question the offer. What's with him? Ingrid hadn't asked for help or training, yet here Ragnar was, offering to teach him swordsmanship out of the blue. When learning the heart of the beast from REM, Ingrid had badgered him endlessly to the point of annoyance. The same had been true when he learned from Jackson. He had always been the one to take the initiative. But this time was different. After watching Ingrid for several days, Ragnar had approached, asked a few questions, and then offered to teach him the sword. Ingrid saw it as a great opportunity, so he didn't bother questioning the reasons. Ragnar, after all, had never spoken about swordsmanship outside of sparring. Ingrid, when it came to swords, was like a ravenous wolf. He had pressed Ragnar with countless questions and attacked with relentless fervor during their duels, only for Ragnar to dodge his inquiries. Now, however, Ragnar was suddenly offering to teach him. Well then. Ragnar dusted himself off and stood, his lips moving as if carefully choosing his words. Ingrid lowered the tip of his sword, patiently waiting. As he waited, Im's words surfaced in his mind. Teaching the sword isn't really my thing. Im was skilled not just with the axe but also with the sword. Ingrid had witnessed him effortlessly cutting down and stabbing foes with it numerous times. I swing it purely by instinct. Teaching something like that doesn't make much sense. You'd be better off learning in a more structured way. It hadn't seemed like an excuse to avoid teaching. Nor did it seem like Im was withholding knowledge out of selfishness. If that were the case, he wouldn't have taught him the heart of the beast either. At the time, Ingrid had simply let it go. As he mused, Ragnar finally spoke. That thing you learned from the savage about a beast's guts or conscience. Heart of the beast. How did that turn into beast's guts? If Im had heard that, he'd have probably swung his axe on the spot. And the thrust. Ragnar continued, meeting Ingrid's gaze. Anything other than that, you'll need to rebuild from the beginning. Can you handle that? Ingrid tilted his head, momentarily unable to understand. In other words, you'll need to strengthen your fundamentals. Are you willing to start from scratch? Ragnar only knew one way to teach and learn the sword. Ingrid hesitated. Why? The mercenary sword style of Valen. No matter what anyone said, it was a solid technique. If you keep using that style, you won't be able to improve much beyond your current level. Ragnar elaborated, his explanations clumsy and vague, but Ingrid quickly grasped the core idea. It came down to this. His current approach had clear limits. He could still improve with his current training, but progress would be slow, and he wouldn't break through his barriers. When he asked why, Ragnar explained it was because he had learned too many disparate techniques. The issue is that your fundamentals are lacking. Hearing this surprised Ingrid. Even at training halls where he'd paid silver or gold coins, instructors always emphasized the importance of basics. He had spent considerable time honing them. Reflecting on it, he realized the criticism wasn't entirely off the mark. He'd never had time to solely focus on fundamentals. Instead, he'd practiced what he considered the basics, slashing and thrusting, on his own. That had been the problem. A brief moment of enlightenment struck him, filling him with elation that resonated through his entire being. His hand holding the sword trembled uncontrollably. Because now, he could see the path ahead. Though the wall and darkness that had always loomed before him remained, a crude but clear path had opened up. This exhilaration was incomparable to anything else in life. As his hand shook, Ragnar spoke cautiously. Now it's time to choose. Will you start anew, or will you settle for what you have? Ragnar believed Ingrid would give up. After all, starting from scratch meant discarding everything he'd built so far and rebuilding from the ground up. This would effectively reduce him from a mid-tier mercenary to a novice. Could he endure that? Especially as someone who lived by the sword on the battlefield? Unless he had multiple lives to spare, it seemed impossible. Even if he wanted to, it wouldn't be easy. In the heat of battle, he would instinctively revert to what was familiar. You'll need to wager a few lives to make it work, Ragnar added, his voice gruff but tinged with concern. Ingrid nodded. His unclear response prompted Ragnar to look at him questioningly. Ingrid finished his thought aloud. I'll start anew. Are you serious? Ragnar was stunned. There wasn't a shred of hesitation in Ingrid's answer. Even though he had been trembling moments ago, seemingly in frustration, despair, or hopelessness. Ingrid's reaction was the exact opposite of what Ragnar had expected. Yes. Genuine joy radiated from him. Chapter 36, Mist of Massacre. Chapter 36, Mist of Massacre. Ragnar was taken aback but quickly stopped overthinking. He's always been an odd guy, anyway. In his eyes, Ingrid wasn't exactly normal to begin with. So, from now on? Ingrid asked. Let's do it, Ragnar replied. Under the clear sky, the two began anew, starting not with swords but by selecting the right weapons. With your strength, there's no reason to stick to a light weapon. A heavier longsword would suit you better. Let's swap, Ragnar said, handing over the sword hanging at his waist. Ingrid found this unexpectedly generous. Would anyone normally give away a weapon they were accustomed to? I haven't used it enough to get attached, Ragnar added. It wasn't a great sword, as Ingrid discovered upon receiving it. His previous weapon seemed better, but he accepted it nonetheless. After all, it was Ragnar teaching him now, and he decided to follow his advice. All right. From an arming sword to a longsword, it had a longer grip for two-handed use, an extended blade by a hand's breadth, and greater weight. Though not crafted from the finest materials, the sword's balance and finish were respectable. Place your right hand forward, left hand back, Ragnar instructed. After switching weapons, Ingrid learned anew how to grip and handle it. He became deeply engrossed in the process, and so did Ragnar. Teaching someone like Ingrid was stimulating in itself. The two spent hours immersed in their training, losing track of time until well past midday. It wasn't until REM appeared that they noticed their missed meal. Skipping lunch for playtime? What are you guys doing? Only then did Ingrid realize how long they had been training. Now that you mention it, I am hungry, Ragnar muttered. Hey, did you mess with our captain, you punk? REM asked. Shut up, you barbarian. Why don't you shut up, you lazy bastard? They bickered as usual while Ingrid, drenched in sweat, let his sword hang low. He was exhausted. While he'd resolved to start fresh, it wasn't something that could be achieved overnight. Not enough. Time was his biggest obstacle. Originally, he had planned to focus on refining techniques to improve over time. However, today's training revealed the opposite. Basic skills are lacking. It was something he hadn't anticipated. Moreover, having an expert like Ragnar guide him made a profound difference compared to practicing alone. Why is your stance like that? You're losing grip strength. Are you trying to stab or slash? What's your intent right now? You're hopeless. Let's start with learning to walk properly. The downpour of criticism was relentless, yet each comment became a valuable asset. Pausing his bickering with REM, Ragnar suddenly asked Ingrid, don't you have any ambition to flaunt your sword skills? Ragnar remembered why he first picked up a sword as a child. Surely, Ingrid also harbored pride, competitiveness, and desire. After all, his daydreams included standing as a lady's protector and receiving her favor, a handkerchief, perhaps. Of course, he wanted recognition. It was human nature. Plenty. I want to show off, big time, Ingrid admitted. He yearned for cheers and dreamed of becoming a bard's hero. Naturally, such desires were part of him. Ragnar nodded, sensing the honesty in his words. What are you rambling about? Anyway, get ready. Orders have come in. The enemy's been spotted. Once again, it was time for battle. Ingrid nodded as Ragnar glanced at him, feeling a pang of regret. Can he survive today? With an unfamiliar weapon and inadequate fundamentals, Ingrid was bound to be in danger. Ragnar believed the man lacked natural talent. Mastery wouldn't come in a day. For a moment, Ragnar blamed himself. Am I sending him to his death? He sighed with a mix of regret and determination. I'll stay close. For today, he resolved to protect him as much as possible. The enemy. Before they could even fortify their makeshift defenses, enemy infantry emerged from the tall grass and fields ahead, advancing rapidly. Their march was unusually swift, and their formation stood out. Groups of soldiers carried tall banners, and their flags flapped in a strong wind suddenly blowing from the enemy's direction. Squinting through the gusts, Ingrid sensed something ominous. His instincts, honed for survival over the years, screamed that this battlefield wouldn't be easy. That intuition proved correct in moments. What the hell? Vengeance, a platoon leader muttered in disbelief. Now, thick fog began rolling in between the Vengeance and Ingrid, spreading across the battlefield. We've been ambushed. Even before her lieutenant reported it, the ferry company commander had already sensed it. The battlefield itself seemed to warn her through her heightened fairy instincts. Magic? Sorcery? Thick mist enveloped the battlefield, clearly unnatural. As a creature attuned to nature, the commander could feel its artificial origin. The mist grew denser until visibility dropped to 0. Commander! Hearing the panic in her lieutenant's voice, the commander realized an unsettling truth. No one's prepared for this. The sudden blindness must have thrown everyone into chaos. It wasn't just her unit, the entire army would be affected. If this mist was a deliberate strategy, it wouldn't stop here. Her fears materialized swiftly. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Bolts and arrows rained down, invisible in the fog, a deadly surprise from unseen attackers. Soldiers fell as quarrels struck them. Even the lieutenant collapsed with an arrow to the head. The commander leapt back, narrowly avoiding the same fate. 2 arrows deflected off her blade as she retreated, pulling a fallen soldier's body in front of her for cover. Without such measures, she would become a blind target. Mist and arrows. A well-prepared strategy. They had been utterly outmaneuvered. Got them. The commander of the Aspen Principality's forces felt exhilaration swell in his chest. Soon, he would decorate this battlefield with the name of victory. The resources expended to reach this moment were no small matter. Failure was not an option. As the mist thickened, the commander shouted, "Fire!" The command, tinged with joy and excitement, rang out, and the prepared arrows and quarrels rained down upon the enemy. What Aspen had prepared was a sorcery. A spell known as the Mist of Massacre, capable of blinding their foes. At the commander's cry, the sorcerer grinned with satisfaction. The spell had worked. It was a sorcery created using the blood of 100 newborn lambs, calves, and foals, as well as water untouched by human hands from a pristine lake. The materials used were anything but ordinary. Much had been sacrificed for this sorcery, though the commander wasn't aware of it. Regardless, the sorcerer had devoted himself entirely to the task. The terrain, the weather, all those rituals to summon rain had been for this moment. The wet ground was crucial for the spell's activation. The blood-soaked banner and pole served as the spell's medium. The soldiers protected by the pole were unaffected by the mist. This was the crux of the sorcerer's efforts. But to dismiss this as mere trickery would be wrong. Though the enemy could not see, Aspen's troops could. Even an imbecile would understand how decisive this advantage was in a large-scale battlefield. The sorcerer cared little for the outcome of the battle or its stakes. He was content with the spell's success. "Happy, are you?" The platoon leader guarding the pole asked. He was the same skilled swordsman who had cornered Ingrid before. Of course. It was nearly a failure, the sorcerer replied, recalling the enemy's prior night raid. The spell's preparations had almost been undone by the attack. Thinking about it still made him shudder. The platoon leader, listening to the sorcerer, thought of the bastard who had led the raid. That bastard. As a member of the Greyhounds and a relentless romanticist, he wanted to kill that man with his own hands. Somewhere in the enemy ranks, that man was undoubtedly lurking. The Aspen platoon leader hadn't forgotten his face, illuminated by torchlight, a fair and delicate visage. He longed to meet him again. As the thick mist rolled in, a damp smell filled the air. At the same time, visibility vanished. Vengeance, visible moments ago, was gone. Not just him, Ragnar, who had been right beside him, had vanished as well. Sorcery! Someone shouted. No, it was REM's voice, laced with frustration. Which damn bastard? Sorcery? What sorcery? Ingrid ducked instinctively as the thought crossed his mind. Arrows and quarrels rained down from above. Stay low. Do not lift your head, a voice beside him said. It was Ragnar. Thud. Thump. The sound of impacts echoed overhead. The ominous feeling became a reality. Still crouched, Ingrid pondered. Sorcery, who? Why would there be a sorcerer here? Even among the indigenous tribes of the western frontier, sorcerers were exceedingly rare. Why here, of all places? But questioning it was meaningless now. Ingrid dismissed the thought. Suddenly, a spear tip lunged toward him out of the mist. Thump. The beast's heart reacted. Boldness surged within him. Without it, his body would have frozen, and he would have died. Ingrid twisted left reflexively and swung his sword upward. Clang! The oil-soaked spear shaft resisted the crude slash. The spear deflected away. The tip had emerged from the mist without warning. Ingrid gauged the spear's origin and attempted to advance. But another spear shot toward him. Clang! He barely deflected this one as well. He realized his stance was off and his weight poorly distributed. The only thing he had done right was gripping his sword tightly. Everything Ragnar had scolded him about during training seemed forgotten. How troublesome, he thought. He had never expected to master it all after one lesson. What now? Back, Ragnar instructed. Ingrid moved in the opposite direction. Thanks to Jackson, his hearing had sharpened. Though he couldn't see, he could hear. Ah. Ooh. Kill them. Damn it. Amid the screams and curses echoing around him, Ingrid dashed forward. Squad leader. Ragnar's startled shout came from behind. And then. Squish. A spear pierced through his neck. Dead on, he thought. Better a clean death than a crude wound. A wave of excruciating pain spread from his neck to his entire body. Darkness began to descend over his vision. Crazy bastard, the soldier who had stabbed him muttered, startled by Ingrid's sudden charge. Die already. The soldier kicked Ingrid, pulling the spear out. The second wave of pain was even worse. Ingrid felt death closing in. A few more breaths, and darkness would consume him. And he welcomed it. What were agony and the fear of death when compared to this? It's enough, he thought. Today had begun with learning the basics from Ragnar. And he had loved every moment of it. Hair. Bleeding profusely, Ingrid laughed. The enemy soldier shivered at the sight. Truly, this man was insane. The darkness came. When he opened his eyes again, a new day had begun. Why go that far? Ragnar asked. This time, Ingrid scratched his head before answering. Because I want to wield a sword well. It wasn't the original answer, but the destination was the same. Do you want to learn the sword? Of course. Ragnar offered again, and Ingrid accepted. The second day of learning the basics began. And then, they stood on the battlefield. The mist spread once more. What the hell? I am cursed again. This time, Ingrid deflected spear shafts 3 times before letting the tip pierce his neck again. Unluckily, it grazed him. His neck bled, dripping onto the ground. Damn it. The thought of bleeding out felt unbearable. Before he could dwell on it, another enemy soldier thrust his spear. He was grateful. Thud. And he died again. Thus began the third dawn.